Did Meghan Markle really get Prince Harry quietly pushed out of his last refuge in California? Not a palace, not a Netflix set, not a charity gala with soft lighting and scripted smiles. A polo field, a place Harry once ran to when the world got too loud. A place where titles didn't matter, cameras stayed at a distance, and friendships were earned the old-fashioned way, through bruises, sweat, and trust. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. And yet today, insiders whisper that Harry is no longer welcome at the Santa Barbara Polo Club, that his closest polo ally, Nacho Figueras, has cut him off, that doors once open now close quietly when his name comes up. Why? Because of Meghan. Or at least, that's the allegation shaking elite equestrian circles right now. And before anyone rushes to judgment, let's be very clear about something. What you're about to hear is not a court ruling, not a police report, not a signed confession. It is a mosaic of eyewitness claims, leaked complaints, whispered warnings, and uncomfortable silences, pieced together from people who say they were there when things went wrong. Very wrong. Here's the question no one wants to ask out loud. How do you get quietly erased from a private club built on loyalty, discretion, and old money codes? You don't do it by being awkward. You don't do it by being famous. And you certainly don't do it by being Prince Harry. Unless you bring chaos where calm is demanded. Unless someone standing beside you repeatedly crosses lines no one is supposed to cross. And unless those lines involve animals that can't speak for themselves. According to multiple sources connected to the Santa Barbara polo scene, the breaking point didn't come during a match. It didn't happen in front of photographers. And it didn't involve Harry directly. It allegedly happened near the stables. Away from the applause, away from the champagne, away from the carefully curated public image. That's where whispers say Meghan Markle lost her temper. And if those whispers are even partially true, they explain why one of Harry's last remaining friendships in elite society may have quietly imploded. But let's rewind. Because to understand why this story matters now, you have to understand what polo meant to Harry after he left the royal family. When Harry walked away from royal duties, he didn't just lose a job. He lost structure, identity, a role that had been mapped out for him since birth. Polo was one of the few things that remained unchanged. Same boots, same rituals, same unspoken rules. On the polo field, Harry wasn't a duke or a headline. He was just another rider trying to keep control of a powerful animal moving at terrifying speed. That's why his friendship with Nacho mattered so much. Nacho wasn't just a teammate. He was a gatekeeper. A bridge between Harry and a world that still valued discretion over drama. A man trusted by clubs, sponsors, and old money patrons who despise scandal. Which makes the current rumors so explosive. Because people like Nacho don't cut ties lightly. They don't issue public statements. They don't rant on social media. They simply stop answering calls. And that's exactly what insiders say happened. The calls stopped. The invites vanished. The excuses became polite, then non-existent. So what changed? Several people connected to the polo club describe a pattern. Not a single incident, but a series of moments that made staff uncomfortable and fellow patrons uneasy. Raised voices where calm was expected. Public criticism of grooms. Tension near the horses that seasoned handlers reportedly found alarming. Again, these are allegations. But they come from individuals who say they had nothing to gain and everything to lose by speaking up. One stable worker, speaking anonymously, described a moment when a horse became visibly distressed after what they called aggressive energy nearby. Another claimed Meghan berated staff within earshot of animals mid-preparation, something considered a serious breach of stable etiquette. And here's the contradiction that makes this story even more unsettling. Meghan has publicly aligned herself with compassion-driven causes, mental health, social justice, empowerment, care. Which raises a brutal question. If you preach empathy, but those around animals describe fear and tension, which version is real? And where was Harry in all this? According to multiple accounts, he looked trapped, torn between defending his wife and preserving the one environment where he still felt normal. Torn between loyalty at home and loyalty to a community that had quietly protected him. Several witnesses recall Harry appearing withdrawn during later matches. Less laughter, less ease, more tension in his posture, more apologies offered on Meghan's behalf. Apologies that, sources say, began to wear thin. Because in elite equestrian culture, horses aren't accessories. They are partners. Any hint of mistreatment, verbal, physical, or emotional, is treated as a moral line, not a misunderstanding. Cross it once, and people watch you closely. Cross it twice, and doors begin to close. Which brings us to the moment many insiders now point to as the beginning of the end. A private exchange. A warning delivered quietly. A message Harry allegedly didn't want to hear. One source claims Nacho pulled Harry aside and said something no friend ever wants to say. Not in anger, not in public, but firmly. This can't continue. Whatever your wife is doing, it's becoming a problem. And if that account is accurate, it reframes everything. Because it suggests Harry wasn't blindsided by what came next. He was warned. The question is, what did Meghan do after that warning? And why do some people insist it wasn't just words anymore? Because the most disturbing claim, the one everyone is afraid to print outright, involves physical interaction with a horse that allegedly crossed from frustration into something far more serious. No graphic details, no sensationalized imagery, just a moment that made seasoned professionals step back and say, this is not okay. And if that moment was reported, documented, or quietly escalated, it would explain why a club built on silence chose separation instead. No scandal, no press release, just exclusion, which leaves Harry standing alone on the sidelines of the one world he thought was still his. But that's not where this story ends. Because the whispers didn't stay contained. They spread to polo wives, to donors, to people who keep diaries instead of talking to tabloids. And one of those records, according to sources, may have changed everything. Because if what's written there is real, it doesn't just explain Harry's polo exile. It threatens to expose a pattern no amount of PR can smooth over. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. What if the moment that sealed Harry's fate didn't happen under bright sunlight on the polo field, but in the shadows behind it? Not where the cameras linger, not where applause drowns everything out, but where only the horses, the grooms, and a few uncomfortable witnesses stood close enough to feel the tension change. Because according to people who say they were there, the breaking point didn't look dramatic at first. It sounded dramatic. A raised voice. Sharp. Unexpected. Too close to the stables. And once that sound cut through the calm, nothing at the Santa Barbara Polo Club felt the same again. This is the moment insiders now refer to in hushed tones as the shouting heard across the stables. Not because it echoed loudly, but because it echoed for a long time afterward. Let's build this carefully, because context matters. The Santa Barbara Polo Club isn't just a venue. It's a culture, a place governed by traditions older than most of its members. Voices are kept low, movements are measured. Emotions, especially negative ones, are contained. Why? Because horses are sensitive. They respond to tone before touch, energy before instruction. Anyone who spends time around them knows this. Which is why, according to multiple accounts, what happened that afternoon stood out immediately. It was a warm day, not unusually hot. The kind of California afternoon polo players love. Matches had wrapped up. Spectators were drifting toward shaded seating. Staff were guiding horses back toward water and rest. Everything should have been winding down. Instead, a confrontation allegedly began near the stables. It wasn't announced. It wasn't staged. And it wasn't meant to be public. But people noticed. One groom later described feeling the air change. Another said the horses closest to the walkway began shifting their weight, ears flicking back and forth, classic signs of stress. And then came the voice. Not Harry's. Witnesses insist on that point. They say it was Meghan. Frustrated. Sharp. Directed at a handler who, according to those same sources, was simply doing his job. Now stop here for a second. Ask yourself this. How often do people really lose their temper in elite spaces? Not often. And when they do, it's usually smoothed over quickly. Apologies offered. Eyes averted. Everyone moves on. But this moment didn't dissolve. Because the shouting didn't stop. According to one account, Meghan gestured toward a horse that hadn't been brought forward quickly enough. Another says she accused staff of incompetence. A third insists the tone, not the words, was the most disturbing part. Harsh. Controlling, unyielding, and horses don't understand hierarchy. They don't care about titles or cameras or contracts. They understand fear. One horse reportedly reacted by sidestepping sharply, forcing a groom to tighten his grip. Another tossed its head, teeth clacking, a warning sign handlers don't ignore. That's when people started paying attention. Because a tense moment is one thing. But when animals react, professionals step in mentally, even if they don't intervene physically. And where was Harry? That's the detail everyone remembers most clearly. They say he froze. Not angry, not defensive, just still, as if he didn't know which role to play. Husband, prince, teammate, guest. Several witnesses recall him stepping forward, then stopping himself. A hand half raised. A look exchanged with a groom that seemed to say, "I'm sorry." That look matters, because it suggests this wasn't the first time. And this is where contradiction enters the story. Publicly, Meghan has been positioned as polished, composed, media-trained, someone acutely aware of optics. So how does that align with multiple people independently describing a loss of control in one of the most etiquette-driven environments imaginable? Was it stress? Was it frustration? Or was it something more habitual? Something that slips out when no microphones are supposed to be on? This is where insiders say the problem wasn't just the incident. It was the pattern. Raised voices weren't unheard of, but they were becoming expected. Staff reportedly began dreading certain moments when Meghan approached the stables. Not because she was violent, but because she was volatile. And volatility around horses is a red line. According to one longtime polo patron, you can be rude to people and still get invited back. Be rough with animals, even emotionally, and you're done. Strong words, but words that explain what happened next. Because the club didn't react publicly, there was no dramatic expulsion, no security escort, no whispered scandal handed to tabloids. Instead, something much more effective happened. Conversations, quiet ones, between club managers and senior patrons, between players and sponsors, between people who decide who belongs and who doesn't. And somewhere in those conversations, Harry's name started coming with an asterisk. Great guy, talented player, but complicated. That but is deadly in elite circles. Because it doesn't accuse. It implies. And implications spread faster than facts. Within days, subtle changes reportedly followed. Harry's usual locker placement changed. Invitations became last minute, or didn't arrive at all. Practice schedules shifted without explanation. Nothing you could point to and say, "That's the moment." Everything you could feel and say, "Something's wrong." And then came the part that truly shocked those closest to the situation. According to two separate sources, someone documented the incident. Not on video, in writing, a private account, time-stamped, detailed, not meant for publication, meant for protection. Because when people feel uncomfortable but powerless, they write things down, just in case. And if that document exists, and if it was shared with the wrong person, it would explain why one of Harry's closest allies allegedly decided enough was enough. Because loyalty has limits, even in polo, especially in polo. Which brings us to the moment many insiders describe as the turning point. A quiet request, a private meeting, no yelling, no accusations, just a line drawn. Sources claim Harry was told, gently but firmly, that future participation would be complicated. That Meghan's presence near the stables was making staff uneasy. That the club couldn't risk complaints. That discretion was non-negotiable. And that's when Harry allegedly realized this wasn't about one argument. It was about reputation. And reputations, once cracked, don't get repaired easily. But here's the twist that keeps people talking. According to those same sources, Meghan didn't respond with remorse. She responded with anger. Not outwardly, not publicly, but privately, toward the people she believed were undermining her. Which raises a chilling question. If she felt attacked, how far was she willing to go to fight back? Because if the next move involved confronting the very people trying to protect the club's image, it would explain why what came after wasn't quiet at all. And why the name Nacho Figueras started appearing in whispers alongside words like ultimatum and final warning. Because when you confront a gatekeeper instead of appeasing them, you don't just risk exclusion. You risk exposure. And if that confrontation really happened behind closed doors, it may have sealed Harry's fate long before he realized what was happening. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. What happens when a warning isn't whispered, but delivered face to face? When friendship stops being a cushion and starts becoming a line in the sand? Because according to multiple insiders, the shouting near the stables wasn't the end of the story. It was the beginning of the reckoning. This next part matters more than anything that came before, because this is where things stopped being awkward and started becoming irreversible. This is where the final warning was given, and where Harry, for the first time, was forced to choose. The days following the stable incident were strange. Too quiet. No headlines. No paparazzi chaos. No sources close to the Sussexes rushing to clean things up. Just silence. The kind of silence that settles in elite circles when people are deciding whether you're still worth protecting. At first, Harry didn't seem alarmed. According to those around him, he assumed things would smooth over the way they always had. A tense moment. A misunderstanding. Tom would fix it. But time didn't fix it. Time hardened it. People began pulling away, not dramatically, but deliberately. Conversations cut short. Invitations postponed. Smiles that didn't reach the eyes. And then came the call. Not from a club official. Not from a manager. From a friend. A real one. The kind who doesn't hide behind assistants or PR teams. Sources say Harry was asked to meet privately. No entourage, no Meghan, no cameras. Just the two of them. And that alone should tell you how serious it was. Because in that world, private meetings are reserved for two things: trust or consequences. According to those familiar with the conversation, it started gently. Reassurances first. History acknowledged. Respect established. Harry was reminded how much he was valued, not as a prince, but as a player. As someone who understood the game, the horses, the culture. Then came the pivot, the part no one enjoys delivering. The concern wasn't framed as gossip. It wasn't emotional. It was practical. Staff were uncomfortable. Handlers were on edge. Horses were reacting poorly. And all roads led back to one person. Meghan. Here's where things get uncomfortable. Because according to insiders, Harry didn't argue. He didn't deny it outright. Instead, he tried to explain. He talked about pressure, about misunderstandings, about how Meghan felt scrutinized and judged. And that response, well-intentioned as it may have been, didn't land the way he hoped. Because in elite equestrian spaces, stress is not an excuse. Everyone there is stressed. Everyone has money, reputations, sponsors, expectations riding on them. And yet, they manage. Which is why the warning that followed was so stark. Sources say Harry was told that the club couldn't afford incidents, real or perceived, that could escalate into complaints. Not in today's climate. Not with animal welfare groups watching. Not with donors who expect discretion above all else. This wasn't personal. It was institutional. And then came the sentence that reportedly changed everything. If this continues, it will cost you more than a match. Let that sink in. This wasn't a threat. It was a forecast. And according to those who heard about the meeting afterward, Harry went quiet. Not defensive. Not angry. Just deflated. Because deep down, he already knew. He had seen the looks from staff. He had felt the tension. He had apologized too many times for things he hadn't done himself. And now someone he trusted was telling him out loud what he'd been trying not to admit. That Meghan wasn't just a distraction. She was a liability. That word hurts. Especially when it's attached to someone you love. Especially when that someone has already cost you family, country, and credibility. So what did Harry do? According to sources, he asked for time. Time to talk. Time to smooth things over. Time to fix it. And the response he received was polite, but firm. Time was running out. Because behind the scenes, something else was happening. Something Harry didn't know about yet. Staff had begun documenting interactions. Not formally. Not as an investigation. But quietly. Dates. Tones. Reactions. Because when people feel uneasy but unsupported, they protect themselves the only way they can. They keep records. And those records, according to multiple accounts, were starting to paint a picture that wasn't flattering. Not dramatic. Not criminal. But consistent. Raised voices. Dismissive gestures. Moments where horses reacted in ways that seasoned handlers found troubling. Again, allegations. But enough of them to raise eyebrows. Enough of them to make senior figures nervous. Because one complaint can be explained away. A pattern cannot. This is where contradiction enters again. Publicly, Meghan was positioning herself as a champion of compassion and empathy. Carefully worded statements. Thoughtful imagery. Controlled messaging. Privately, according to those close to the club, her behavior didn't always match that image. And people noticed. One longtime patron allegedly remarked, "She talks like she's constantly being attacked, but she's the only one raising her voice." That comment spread. Quietly. Carefully. The way damaging observations always do in tight-knit circles. Which brings us to the moment Harry reportedly tried to intervene. Sources claim he approached club management informally, hoping to clear the air, to explain, to reassure. But by then, the mood had shifted. This wasn't about one couple anymore. It was about risk management. And risk management doesn't bend for feelings. The club had a choice. Ignore the concerns and hope nothing escalated. Or create distance now, before something became public. And distance, in this case, meant redefining access. Not banning Harry outright. Not humiliating him. Just quietly deprioritizing him. Less access. Fewer invites. More obstacles. A soft exit. Unless, of course, Meghan escalated things. And according to insiders, she did. Because after Harry relayed the conversation, after he tried to explain the stakes, sources say Meghan was furious. Not embarrassed. Not reflective. Furious. She believed she was being judged. Targeted. Undermined. And instead of de-escalating, she allegedly chose confrontation. Which raises a chilling question. When someone feels cornered, do they retreat? Or do they attack? Because the next move, according to multiple accounts, wasn't made quietly. It involved direct contact. Direct words. And a message that landed like gasoline on a fire. A private showdown that would take the situation from salvageable to scorched earth. And if the accounts of that confrontation are accurate, it explains why the warning turned into a decision. Why the door didn't just close, it locked. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. What happens when confrontation replaces caution? When someone decides silence is no longer acceptable, and chooses to push back, not realizing how thin the ice already is. Because according to people close to the situation, the final collapse didn't come from the warning itself. It came from what followed. From a choice that turned concern into certainty. And from a private showdown that changed how everyone involved saw Harry forever. Here's the uncomfortable truth no one likes to admit. Elite spaces don't explode. They freeze. And once frozen, they don't thaw easily. After Harry relayed the warning he'd received, the gentle but unmistakable message that things needed to change, those close to him say he hoped for compromise. Boundaries. Guidelines. Distance. Anything that would allow him to stay. But according to multiple sources, that wasn't how Meghan saw it. She didn't hear concern. She heard accusation. She didn't hear protection. She heard exclusion. And when someone already feels persecuted, even a soft boundary can feel like betrayal. That's when she allegedly decided to confront the situation head-on. Not through Harry. Not through staff. But directly. This matters. Because in that world, protocol isn't about hierarchy. It's about harmony. You don't confront gatekeepers. You don't challenge norms. You don't force conversations that are meant to stay implied. And yet, insiders claim Meghan requested, or engineered, a private moment with Nacho Figueras himself. No audience. No witnesses. Just words. What exactly was said in that conversation may never be fully known. But multiple people familiar with the aftermath describe the same emotional temperature. Cold. Measured. And final. According to one account, Meghan framed the situation as discrimination. She believed she was being unfairly judged because she wasn't part of the traditional polo world. That expectations were being applied to her that others didn't face. She allegedly questioned why her behavior was being scrutinized when others had tempers too. Here's where the contradiction deepens. Because while tempers exist everywhere, horses do not react to politics. They react to energy. And people who live among them know the difference between assertiveness and agitation. Sources say Nacho listened. Didn't interrupt. Didn't raise his voice. But when he responded, it wasn't emotional. It was procedural. He reportedly explained that this wasn't about personal feelings. It was about standards. About staff comfort. About animal welfare optics. About the unspoken contract every member agrees to when they step onto that field. And then, according to those who heard about the exchange afterward, he said something that Meghan didn't expect. This isn't a negotiation. That sentence, if accurately reported, marks the moment things shifted from tense to terminal. Because it meant the door Harry hoped to keep open was no longer his to hold. And if Meghan pressed after that, It would only confirm the concerns already swirling, which, insiders say, is exactly what happened. The conversation didn't end with resolution. It ended with resentment. And resentment has a way of leaking. Within days, whispers spread that Meghan was difficult, that she was volatile, that she didn't understand how things worked. Words no one wants attached to their name in elite circles. Harry felt it immediately. According to sources close to him, his demeanor changed. He became quieter, less engaged, almost apologetic simply for showing up. And then came the first unmistakable signal. Harry wasn't scheduled for the next practice match. Not officially dropped. Just omitted. No explanation offered. If you've ever been iced out of a group, you know how this feels. You replay every interaction. You wonder what you could have done differently. You tell yourself it's temporary. But deep down you know. And Harry knew. This wasn't about polo anymore. It was about association. Because in spaces built on reputation, association is everything. Who you bring reflects who you are. And according to insiders, Meghan had become a risk no one wanted to shoulder. But here's the part that makes this story even more unsettling. Instead of retreating, sources say Meghan retaliated. Not physically, not directly, through narrative. Within days of the confrontation, sympathetic outlets began circulating stories portraying her as isolated, targeted, misunderstood. Articles framed polo culture as elitist, insiders as snobbish, criticism as coded prejudice. Now ask yourself this. If you're trying to de-escalate a situation, do you light a media match? Because in the polo world, nothing enrages gatekeepers more than publicity, especially unwanted publicity. According to one longtime patron, the moment stories started circulating, the decision was made. Because now the risk wasn't just internal discomfort. It was exposure, animal welfare rumors, staff complaints, a narrative war no one had signed up for. And once that risk crystallized, Harry's fate was sealed. Not because he was disliked, but because he was attached to chaos. Which brings us to the most heartbreaking part of this chapter. Harry tried to fix it. Sources say he reached out again, offered assurances, promised boundaries. But by then, trust had evaporated. Because if one thing had become clear, it was this. Meghan didn't accept limits. And anyone who can't accept limits becomes unmanageable. So the club did what elite institutions always do when they want someone gone without a scandal. They let the relationship die of neglect. Calls unanswered. Messages delayed. Opportunities redirected elsewhere. No confrontation. Just absence. Harry showed up one afternoon and found his usual locker reassigned. A small detail. A devastating message. He reportedly stood there longer than necessary, staring at the nameplate that had replaced his. That's when it hit him. This wasn't temporary. This wasn't reparable. And it wasn't about polo. It was about who he had become. And who he stood beside. But the story doesn't end with Harry's quiet exclusion. Because while the club moved on, others didn't. Staff who had documented incidents. Patrons who had whispered concerns. And one person in particular who had been writing things down all along. Someone who didn't confront, didn't leak, didn't speak, until they did. And when that record surfaced, according to multiple sources, it reframed everything. Not as gossip, but as a pattern. One that would draw attention far beyond the polo field, into places Meghan never expected scrutiny from. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. What happens when the truth isn't spoken, but written, not leaked, not filmed, not whispered across club tables, but documented, carefully, privately, by someone who had seen too much for too long. Because the next chapter of this unraveling scandal isn't about what Meghan said in public, or even what Harry tried to hide behind closed doors. It's about what someone saw, what they couldn't ignore, and what they decided to record. A diary, not a tell-all memoir, not a blog post, a handwritten, quietly kept diary from someone who was there. Someone close enough to see the contradictions unfold up close. Someone respected enough to keep their thoughts private until now. They're only being called the insider. And while their identity is being fiercely protected, their notes, at least according to multiple people who claim to have seen them, tell a very different story than the one the Sussex camp has carefully crafted. Let's rewind. It started as routine habit. This insider had always documented their days, social events, observations, reflections, more out of personal habit than intention. A harmless journal, part etiquette, part reflection. But over time, the entries changed. They became sharper, more detailed, less polite. Because something strange was happening at the Santa Barbara Polo Club, and it had a name. Meghan. According to excerpts obtained by those close to the situation, the diary doesn't begin with accusations. It begins with confusion. Early entries reference Meghan's fashion choices, her silence during dinners, her tendency to scan rooms rather than engage. But then, the tone shifts. Entry number 23. She corrected the groom's technique like she'd trained thoroughbreds. The horse recoiled. Entry number 31. Harry apologized again. That makes 3 times this month. Entry number 36. Another incident. Raised voice near the feeding area. Horse visibly distressed. Not normal. Each entry stands alone. But when read in sequence, a pattern emerges. And patterns are powerful. Because patterns suggest this wasn't a one-time outburst. It was a behavior, a rhythm, a storm that kept circling back to the same spot. Staff allegedly began sharing quiet glances when Meghan approached. Grooms repositioned horses when she came near. One even wrote a note to himself. Don't leave her alone near Stallion 6. But it's entry number 48 that stopped everyone cold. It reportedly reads, she slapped the gelding's flank and blamed the handler. I saw it. So did 2 others. No one spoke. Let's pause here. This is an allegation. Unverified. Unconfirmed. But written down in real time, long before the scandal broke. And if this diary is real, and insiders swear it is, then it suggests the staff knew something was wrong, but felt powerless to act. Because how do you challenge royalty by marriage? How do you accuse the wife of Prince Harry? And even more terrifying, how do you protect animals when cameras will never catch what you've seen? This is where the diary changes from documentation to desperation. Later entries include phrases like, whispers of a complaint being drafted, donors nervous, threats of withdrawal if press gets involved. Staff morale low. Everyone walks on eggshells when she's near the stables. And then this. Entry number 61, club board met. Quiet vote. Decision to minimize Sussex involvement without confrontation. That entry, according to those who've read it, aligns almost exactly with the timing of Harry's removal from the roster. Coincidence? Or confirmation? Because if even part of this diary is authentic, it changes the entire narrative. It means the decision to edge Harry out wasn't just about PR. It was about protection. For the staff. For the animals. For the club's integrity. But here's where it gets darker. The diary wasn't leaked to the press. It was handed, deliberately, to someone else. To a contact within an animal welfare organization. Someone who knew how to read between the lines. Someone who didn't need video proof to understand distress signals. And that contact, according to reports, didn't stay silent. They reportedly initiated a quiet inquiry. Not an investigation. Not a public crusade. But a private review of the situation. Questions were asked. Notes were compared. Whispers grew louder. Until one day, a sealed complaint was filed. And that complaint, filed not against Harry, but in relation to environmental conduct concerns, triggered alarm bells behind the scenes. Because when you're dealing with multi-million-dollar horses, even the hint of misconduct is explosive. Donors pull funding. Sponsors back away. Lawyers start circling. And in that world, perception is as dangerous as proof. That's why, according to those in the know, the complaint never saw daylight. It was buried, reviewed internally, sealed, classified as sensitive. But you can't unring a bell, especially not one this loud, because the very act of filing it meant something irreversible had happened. Meghan had crossed a line, not in the media, but in the margins of someone's notebook. And when margins start turning into evidence, silence turns into strategy. That's when the palace, according to insiders, quietly took notice. Not because they cared about polo, but because Meghan was becoming a problem, again. Not in tabloids. In the inner circles they still depend on. And that's why this diary matters. Because it didn't speak with anger. It spoke with detail. No fluff. No fiction. Just facts as someone saw them. Facts that painted a portrait of tension, arrogance, and disregard. And those facts, once exposed to the right people, had consequences. But here's the twist. Meghan doesn't know who wrote the diary. No one does, at least not publicly. And that mystery has ignited a hunt. Because if she finds out, retaliation won't be quiet. And if she doesn't, paranoia will fester. Meanwhile, the diary still exists, locked in a drawer, protected by attorneys, cited quietly in internal club documents. Proof? Maybe not in court, but in elite society, perception is the verdict. And this perception has already done its damage. Harry has been cut off. The club has gone silent. And Meghan? She's planning her next move. Because what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. What happens when a royal scandal becomes too risky to ignore, even for Buckingham Palace? Because the diary didn't just rattle the polo world. It pierced the last place Meghan Markle never expected to hear the word liability. The palace, not the gold-draped, balcony-smiling, press statement issuing facade the public sees. The real one. The one behind closed doors. The one that doesn't blink unless the brand is in jeopardy. And Meghan? According to sources close to former royal aides, she had just become the brand's biggest headache all over again. But this time, not because of gossip. Because of horses. Because of a diary. Because of a sealed complaint. Because of staff in Santa Barbara now using words like volatile, unpredictable, and worst of all, dangerous. This was no longer a PR cleanup job. This was about damage control, reputation triage. The kind they reserve for rogue family members with titles, but no restraint. And make no mistake, this wasn't the first time palace insiders had been quietly pulled back into Harry and Meghan's chaos. But it was the first time animals were involved. And in today's world, mistreating animals, even implied, even unproven, is career-ending. Ask anyone in Hollywood. Ask any politician. Ask any influencer. You can bounce back from lies, cheating, even bankruptcy. But not from harming something defenseless. Not from mistreating a horse. Which is why, according to one deeply embedded source, the moment that complaint hit legal review, the temperature in the palace dropped 10 degrees. So what did Kensington do? They didn't call Meghan. They didn't call Harry. They called Nacho. That's right. According to a senior figure in the Argentine equestrian world, a palace-linked legal representative reached out, informally, to Nacho Figueras. Why? To assess the threat level. To find out just how bad this could get. How deep the paper trail ran. How likely it was that Meghan's alleged conduct might become public record through an animal rights channel, not a royal leak. And Nacho? He was direct, respectful, professional, but clear. This has gone too far, he allegedly told them. There are documents. There are witnesses. I've done everything I could. Let that land. I've done everything I could. Translation? He tried to protect Harry. He tried to give Meghan the benefit of the doubt. He tried to prevent this from snowballing. But she wouldn't stop. And now, the snowball was crashing into the palace gates. Sources say that's when the royal household went into defensive mode. Meetings, private memos, briefings labeled confidential, domestic animal welfare incident, Santa Barbara. They weren't investigating Meghan. They were insulating the monarchy. Why? Because Harry still carries a title. Because Meghan is still married to him. Because any scandal that involves them still splashes mud on the crown. So what does insulation look like in a royal context? It's subtle, surgical. First, all charitable references to Meghan involving animals were quietly removed or archived. Pages on old patronages disappeared. Links to wildlife causes went dead. Animal rescue photos vanished from press kits. Second, legal teams made contact with US-based firms, specifically ones that specialize in reputational crisis tied to animal rights litigation. That's right. The palace began gaming out legal responses in case PETA or another high-profile group got wind of the complaint. Why so aggressive? Because they know Meghan, and they knew she wouldn't back down, which made her unpredictable. And unpredictable royals make the brand nervous. But here's the most telling part. When these precautions were taken, when Kensington Palace was preparing for possible fallout, they didn't reach out to Meghan directly. They reached out to Doria Ragland. That's right, Meghan's mother. Why? Because Doria is the only person in Meghan's life who isn't reactive, who isn't on payroll, who isn't performing. She's the one person who can look Meghan in the eye and say, stop. And sources say the message delivered through Doria was simple. This will not go the way you think. Back down. Now. But did she? According to the same sources, no. She doubled down. Because Meghan, in her mind, wasn't losing. She was being silenced, punished for asserting herself, vilified for having standards. And the more pressure came from above, the more she began planning her counteroffensive. The press stories? That was just the beginning. Behind the scenes, Meghan's team allegedly began preparing a truth bomb. A documentary-style special about elitism in equestrian culture and invisible discrimination in elite American sporting clubs. Let that sink in. She wasn't walking away. She was preparing to blow the whole thing up, to frame it as race, as class, as systemic exclusion, to flip the scandal into a platform. But here's the part Meghan underestimated. The moment animal welfare allegations entered the chat, no one cared about her narrative anymore. Not the club, not Nacho, not the donors, and certainly not the palace. Because for the first time, this wasn't about a feud. It was about something everyone, right or left, royalist or Republican, agrees on. Horses can't speak. And if someone who can misuses that silence, they must be exposed. Which is why, around this time, the sealed complaint was quietly reopened. No press, no lawyers, yet. Just scrutiny, review, and fear. Because if Meghan Markle had mistreated a horse, and multiple witnesses saw it, and a staff diary confirmed it, and the palace tried to bury it, that's not just a scandal. That's a cover-up. And cover-ups burn everything in their path. So now, the question became, would the evidence stay buried? Would the whispers fade? Would Harry ever return to the only circle that still welcomed him as just a guy on a horse? Or was this truly the end? Not of a polo career, of trust, of respect, of the last quiet space where Harry was still seen as himself. But what came next would change everything. And no one saw it coming. What if the very thing meant to protect Meghan became the thing that finally exposed her? Because as whispers became records and sealed reports were quietly passed hand to hand, something else was happening behind the scenes. Something no one expected, not even the palace. A second stable stepped forward. That's right. One complaint is a red flag. Two, that's a fire. Because now it wasn't just Santa Barbara Polo Club on edge. Now, a Montecito-based private stable. Used for charity work, weekend riding sessions, and select VIP lessons, had submitted a formal statement of concern. And guess whose name was on it? Meghan Markle. No title, no prefix, just a line item. Recent incident involving guest, Ms. Meghan Markle. So how did this stay quiet? Because the stable wasn't just private. It was exclusive, owned by a family that makes their wealth the old-fashioned way, quietly. The kind of place where celebrities rent out time with horses like others book spa treatments. Where discretion is baked into the cost. Where reputations matter more than revenue. But even there, Meghan allegedly crossed a line. Let's rewind. Months before the Santa Barbara confrontation, Meghan attended a private charity function at the Montecito stable, invited not because of who she was, but because of who she had been. Royal, famous, useful. The event was small, fewer than 30 guests. A mix of philanthropists, donors, and celebrity-adjacent influencers. Meghan arrived late. Not unusual. She came dressed impeccably. Also not unusual. What was unusual, according to several attendees, was how she behaved once she arrived near the horses. She was stiff, one donor said. You could tell she didn't want to touch them unless a camera was on. That would have been fine. Plenty of people are wary around animals. But things reportedly shifted when a trainer began giving instructions. A simple demonstration of how to approach the mare. Calm voice. Hands low. No sudden movements. Classic stable etiquette. That's when Meghan allegedly interrupted. I know how to do this, she said, brushing off the trainer with a tone that one observer described as dismissive to the point of disrespect. And then she approached the horse. Too quickly, too loud, too assertive. The mare pulled back. Not a big reaction, just a jolt, but enough for the trainer to step in. Only Meghan didn't stop. She doubled down. What's wrong with her? She snapped. Is she broken? That sentence, those 5 words, would later appear, verbatim, in the complaint submitted by the stable. And here's where everything escalated. Because unlike at the Polo Club, this event was partially filmed. Not by press, not by paparazzi, by the charity. For B-roll, for social media, for later use. And somewhere in that footage, now locked away in legal custody, is a clip. Brief, blurry, but clear enough to show Meghan pulling on the reins too tightly. Clear enough to capture the startled reaction of the horse. Clear enough to catch a trainer stepping in and saying, "Please don't do that." Clear enough, reportedly, to show Meghan brushing the warning off. That footage hasn't leaked yet, but it exists. And those who've seen it, under legal protection, say it's not flattering, because it doesn't show cruelty. It shows control, disregard, impatience, a kind of entitlement that feels small in a boardroom, but massive next to a 1,200-pound animal. That footage triggered the second sealed complaint. This time, not from Polo insiders, from a family that has donated millions to animal therapy programs. And they were furious, not because the horse was harmed, but because no one stopped it, because everyone watched her behave that way and let her leave with a smile. Until now. Now it was pattern. Now it was precedent. 2 sealed complaints. 2 separate venues. 2 groups of witnesses. 1 name in common. And Meghan? She had no idea it was coming. Because the complaint was filed after the fact. After the club scandal. After the diary surfaced. It was retroactive. It was revenge. Or justice? Depends who you ask. Because while Meghan's defenders are already calling it a coordinated smear campaign, the timing is suspiciously damning. One stable in April, another in July, and a common narrative. Disrespect, denial, disruption. The Montecito complaint didn't just reference Meghan. It mentioned Harry, specifically his silence, how he stood back during the incident, how he smiled as if nothing had happened, how he seemed detached from the discomfort of the handlers. And that was the most painful blow of all, because it wasn't just Meghan's behavior on trial now. It was Harry's complicity, unspoken, unchallenged, silent. Sources say this was the moment the palace stopped trying to protect him. Because the internal review notes, never intended for public view, used the phrase, "Failure to intervene raises reputational concerns of its own." There it is. Harry wasn't the problem, but he didn't stop the problem, and that made him part of it. By now, the situation had reached critical mass. Animal rights groups were sniffing around. Sponsors were quietly backing out of Sussex-related events. And worst of all, media producers were distancing themselves from projects involving Meghan and horses. A Netflix charity special featuring animals? Quietly shelved. A children's book based on rescue stories? Suspended. A potential partnership with a luxury equine brand? Cancelled. Why? Because no one wants their logo attached to the phrase, "Meghan Markle physically abuses horses." Even if it's never proven. Even if it's just hearsay. Because perception is poison. And Meghan's cup was full. Harry, meanwhile, had become a ghost in Santa Barbara. He no longer attended events. No longer checked in with teammates. No longer spoke to Nacho. The silence was total. Except, of course, for the rumors. Because someone always talks. And this time, it was a therapist. Not Meghan's. Not Harry's. Someone loosely connected to the inner circle. Someone who allegedly heard what Harry confessed after it all came crashing down. A single sentence. Quiet. Broken. Haunting. "I think I lost the last place that ever felt like mine." But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. What does a man do when every escape is stripped away? When the last place that felt like his is no longer his to return to? When even the horses, those silent, unjudging creatures, have been turned into collateral damage in a war he didn't know he was fighting. Because after the complaints, the confrontation, and the diary, Harry wasn't just losing Polo. He was losing himself. This is the chapter no one wants to write. Not the tabloids. Not the PR firms. Not even Harry's closest allies. Because it's not explosive. It's not scandalous. It's just sad. Quiet sadness. The kind that doesn't make headlines, but makes everything hurt. Let's go back to the day Harry found out the second complaint had been filed. It didn't come in a meeting. It didn't come from Meghan. It came from an old friend. A groom from the Montecito stable. Someone who had worked with Harry's horses for years. Someone who respected him, not as a prince, but as a rider. They called him. Just a quiet heads up. Another complaint's gone in. You weren't named, but landed like a sledgehammer. Because Harry knew. He knew who had been there. He knew what had happened. And he knew the footage existed. He'd seen Meghan grip the reins too tight. He'd seen the trainer flinch. He'd seen the horse pull back, wide-eyed. And he had done nothing. Not because he didn't care. Because he didn't know how to stop her. What do you say to someone who doesn't think they've done anything wrong? What do you do when your silence is your only defense against another explosion? So he stayed silent. And now, that silence had cost him everything. The friend on the phone didn't ask questions. Didn't place blame. Just said, they're not going to say it publicly, but you're not welcome anymore. Not there. Not at the club. Not anywhere near the stables. There it was. The sentence Harry had been dreading since the day Nacho looked him in the eye and said, "This isn't sustainable." He thanked a friend, hung up, sat down, and didn't move for a long time. According to someone who saw him that day, he looked like a man grieving. Not angry, not confused. Grieving. Because that's what it was. A loss. Not of reputation. Not of opportunity. Of peace. Because the stables had always been where the noise stopped. Where Meghan's schedule, the press, the lawsuits, the branding, all of it, faded. It was just him, and the horses, and the rhythm of a game that didn't care about royal bloodlines. Now that was gone, and in its place, silence. No more weekend matches. No more training sessions. No more excuses to spend time with Nacho and the few people who still treated him like Harry, not the Duke. And worst of all, no more horses. He didn't own his own anymore. He couldn't ride in public without triggering media attention. And Meghan? She wasn't asking how he felt. Because Meghan, according to insiders, wasn't grieving. She was planning. Still convinced this was all a smear. Still convinced she could spin it. Still convinced that if she positioned herself as the outsider, the narrative would flip. And maybe she was right. She'd done it before. But Harry wasn't with her anymore, not mentally. He was slipping into a space the public rarely sees from him. Depression, a return of the old shadows. Friends close to him described a change. He stopped calling, stopped replying to messages, stopped showing up for dinners, charity events, even Zoom calls for Archwell. And then he sold his gear, his custom mallets, his boots, his helmet, all of it. Gone. Not given away. Sold. Like he wanted it gone. Like he needed to sever the last thread. When asked about it by a friend, Harry reportedly shrugged. They weren't mine anymore. 6 words. But they carried years of loss. Because Harry's been losing things for a long time now. His family. His home. His military titles. His patronages. And now, his escape. Polo was the one place where he didn't need to explain himself. Didn't need to apologize for leaving the firm. Didn't need to smile for the press. Now, even that had become another casualty of the war between Harry and the world. And Meghan? She was moving on. Behind closed doors, insiders say she began laying the groundwork for a pivot. Away from Santa Barbara. Away from Montecito. Away from the whispers. Back toward Hollywood. More visibility. More control. More distance from the scenes she could no longer manage. But Harry? He stayed still. He didn't want London. Didn't want Los Angeles. Didn't even want Polo. He just wanted peace. And he couldn't find it. Not in Montecito. Not in Meghan. Not even in himself. Because peace isn't something you buy. It's something you build. And Harry? He'd let someone else build his world for him. Now the foundation was cracked. And everything was crumbling. One night, weeks after the complaint surfaced, a staffer allegedly found Harry alone in the backyard, sitting on a bench, looking at nothing. When asked if he was okay, he didn't respond. He just muttered, "I miss Argentina." The staffer was confused. "Argentina, sir?" Harry looked up, nodded. "Yeah, 2012. Polo match. Felt like I belonged." That was it. That was the truth. He hadn't belonged anywhere since. And now, even the horses had turned away. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. What happens when a warning isn't whispered, but delivered face to face? When friendship stops being a cushion and starts becoming a line in the sand. Because according to multiple insiders, the shouting near the stables wasn't the end of the story. It was the beginning of the reckoning. This next part matters more than anything that came before, because this is where things stopped being awkward and started becoming irreversible. This is where the final warning was given. And where Harry, for the first time, was forced to choose. The days following the stable incident were strange. Too quiet. No headlines. No paparazzi chaos. No sources close to the Sussexes rushing to clean things up. Just silence. The kind of silence that settles in elite circles when people are deciding whether you're still worth protecting. At first, Harry didn't seem alarmed. According to those around him, he assumed things would smooth over the way they always had. A tense moment. A misunderstanding. Time would fix it. But time didn't fix it. Time hardened it. People began pulling away, not dramatically, but deliberately. Conversations cut short. Invitations postponed. Smiles that didn't reach the eyes. And then came the call. Not from a club official. Not from a manager. From a friend. A real one. The kind who doesn't hide behind assistants or PR teams. Sources say Harry was asked to meet privately. No entourage, no Meghan, no cameras. Just the two of them. And that alone should tell you how serious it was. Because in that world, private meetings are reserved for two things: trust or consequences. According to those familiar with the conversation, it started gently. Reassurances first. History acknowledged. Respect established. Harry was reminded how much he was valued, not as a prince, but as a player. As someone who understood the game, the horses, the culture. Then came the pivot, the part no one enjoys delivering. The concern wasn't framed as gossip. It wasn't emotional. It was practical. Staff were uncomfortable. Handlers were on edge. Horses were reacting poorly. And all roads led back to one person. Meghan. Here's where things get uncomfortable. Because according to insiders, Harry didn't argue. He didn't deny it outright. Instead, he tried to explain. He talked about pressure, about misunderstandings, about how Meghan felt scrutinized and judged. And that response, well-intentioned as it may have been, didn't land the way he hoped. Because in elite equestrian spaces, stress is not an excuse. Everyone there is stressed. Everyone has money, reputations, sponsors, expectations riding on them. And yet, they manage. Which is why the warning that followed was so stark. Sources say Harry was told that the club couldn't afford incidents, real or perceived, that could escalate into complaints. Not in today's climate. Not with animal welfare groups watching. Not with donors who expect discretion above all else. This wasn't personal. It was institutional. And then came the sentence that reportedly changed everything. If this continues, it will cost you more than a match. Let that sink in. This wasn't a threat. It was a forecast. And according to those who heard about the meeting afterward, Harry went quiet. Not defensive. Not angry. Just deflated. Because deep down, he already knew. He had seen the looks from staff. He had felt the tension. He had apologized too many times for things he hadn't done himself. And now someone he trusted was telling him out loud what he'd been trying not to admit. That Meghan wasn't just a distraction. She was a liability. That word hurts. Especially when it's attached to someone you love. Especially when that someone has already cost you family, country, and credibility. So what did Harry do? According to sources, he asked for time. Time to talk. Time to smooth things over. Time to fix it. And the response he received was polite, but firm. Time was running out. Because behind the scenes, something else was happening. Something Harry didn't know about yet. Staff had begun documenting interactions. Not formally. Not as an investigation. But quietly. Dates. Tones. Reactions. Because when people feel uneasy but unsupported, they protect themselves the only way they can. They keep records. And those records, according to multiple accounts, were starting to paint a picture that wasn't flattering. Not dramatic. Not criminal. But consistent. Raised voices. Dismissive gestures. Moments where horses reacted in ways that seasoned handlers found troubling. Again, allegations. But enough of them to raise eyebrows. Enough of them to make senior figures nervous. Because one complaint can be explained away. A pattern cannot. This is where contradiction enters again. Publicly, Meghan was positioning herself as a champion of compassion and empathy. Carefully worded statements. Thoughtful imagery. Controlled messaging. Privately, according to those close to the club, her behavior didn't always match that image. And people noticed. One longtime patron allegedly remarked, "She talks like she's constantly being attacked, but she's the only one raising her voice." That comment spread. Quietly. Carefully. The way damaging observations always do in tight-knit circles. Which brings us to the moment Harry reportedly tried to intervene. Sources claim he approached club management informally, hoping to clear the air, to explain, to reassure. But by then, the mood had shifted. This wasn't about one couple anymore. It was about risk management. And risk management doesn't bend for feelings. The club had a choice. Ignore the concerns and hope nothing escalated. Or create distance now, before something became public. And distance, in this case, meant redefining access. Not banning Harry outright. Not humiliating him. Just quietly deprioritizing him. Less access. Fewer invites. More obstacles. A soft exit. Unless, of course, Meghan escalated things. And according to insiders, she did. Because after Harry relayed the conversation, after he tried to explain the stakes, sources say Meghan was furious. Not embarrassed. Not reflective. Furious. She believed she was being judged, targeted, undermined. And instead of de-escalating, she allegedly chose confrontation, which raises a chilling question.